Hey guys, welcome back to the Knights of the World number 10, hosted by Ian Pierce. And today we have joining us the friendly Steve Friedman. He's a writer and he has a lot of achievements in his life. So, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Ian.
Thanks. That's fantastic. So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I guess some people know what they want to do in life from an early age. I consider myself, on the contrary, a late bloomer. So I spent 30 years in corporate America, primarily in commercial and leadership roles, and enjoyed that for the most part. Retired recently and went back and reconnected with a passion that I had when I was in high school of writing and hadn't done a lot of writing since then, but I decided I wanted to just write some stories, and that became my memoir. But during the process, I realized that there were a lot of connections in my life. You know, you don't realize it when they happen, but when you stand back years later, you kind of see these connections. And for me, the biggest connection was introversion. And so it really started me down a path of discovering a new passion for myself in retirement. And that was learning about introversion for myself because it was very therapeutic, but also connecting with the roughly 50% of America that are also introverts and trying to help them in their path as well, because oftentimes it can be a struggle, as it was certainly for me. So that's really um, helped me to write a book, have a podcast, have a blog and a website, and join podcasts like yours to talk to a variety of audiences.
So, where were you born? Like, where are you from?
I grew up in Alabama, in Birmingham, went to school at the University of Alabama, and then came to Houston when I graduated and entered the work world with a large energy company and was with them for 30 years and traveled around the world and did an expat assignment. And then we're still here in Houston. My kids, I have three kids, and they're all grown up and almost all out of school now. And so my wife and I are about to be empty nesters.
So, where did you, where's some of the countries you went to?
Um, so um, about midway through my career, we had the opportunity to go overseas and live in London. So we lived in London, and from there we traveled a lot. We did all the UK, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland. We did France, Spain, Czechoslovakia was great. Croatia was amazing. Italy, Israel, and my work was I was leading a global trading team, and so I had teams in places like Manila, Tokyo, Nigeria, Barbados. So I had a great time traveling around the world and seeing a lot of different cultures and trying to kind of learn from those and enjoy the travel with the family as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool because I kind of want to somehow I really want to go around and I just want to visually see like all these different cultures and environments that people live in.
Yeah, it's one thing to kind of read about them, or now we can see a lot of things in global news or online. But when you're actually there, and many of the places I was there enough times with a team that was kind of born and raised in those different locations, that you get a little bit of an insight as to what life really is like. And you know, we have a lot of things in common, but there's a tremendous amount of differences in the culture, which are really pretty fascinating.
hmm So what were so like what were so I know you said you write a lot, and I kind of want to know like what else did you do like when you were younger in high school and college?
Well, as I mentioned, I was an introvert. Now, that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but I grew up with three older sisters. All of my three sisters were pretty extroverted, hard to get them off the telephone. They loved to talk with their friends and go out on weekends. I myself, had my small group of friends in the neighborhood, but my preference was usually to stay home and do hobbies and things like that at home, playing basketball, did some reading and did some writing back then, stamp collecting, some sports. But that was really what I did as a kid. I mean, I grew up, in a good household with loving parents, all that sort of stuff. But I also felt like I was kind of different because my sisters were all running around with their big groups of friends, and my parents were kind of nudging me out, thinking that was what I should be doing as well. So I grew up with this feeling that something was different, and it's a feeling that I think a lot of people, not just teenagers, but a lot of adults feel that way. As I mentioned, about half the world are introverts, and many of them, some have kind of learned about it and understand the strengths and great things that introversion brings. But a lot of people kind of subject themselves to the stigmas and myths of introversion. There's a lot, even today in the dictionary and thesaurus, of words like loner, hermit, recluse. I mean, horrible words that don't really reflect what people really are. But even introverts kind of succumb to that at times until they kind of learn what it really means and the strengths and differences that they can bring to family, friendship groups, or work. When I graduated college, when I was 22, I came straight out to Houston, didn't know anybody, but jumped into work and enjoyed the work for the most part, and met some friends. And we just kind of stayed around here, around Houston, most of the time. I got married when I was 25, and so we had started to have a family. Did a couple of years of I was transferred up to Detroit to work at a distribution terminal, so we saw a little bit of a different part of the country there. And mostly, other than our stint in London, stayed here and traveled around the U.S. mostly since then.
So you were working in trade. Is that what it was?
I was generally in like a supply and distribution, within which there's a trading organization, oil
Mm-hmm.
trading. And so I spent about half of my career in various different jobs in the trading group, which was fantastic experience.
And so you wrote a book, correct?
I wrote a book, as I mentioned, when I was getting ready to retire. I had this kind of introspective period where I connected pieces, and so I started jotting them down and decided ultimately that there was a lot of people out there like me that might have had similar struggles and trying to figure out how to triumph with introversion. And so I wrote a book, a memoir called In Search of Courage, an introvert story. So that came out about a year and a half ago. And I'm working on a book right now about leadership for introverts, how to use our strengths to tackle obstacles that seem to be daunting for many introverts, like networking and communication, but really can be strengths of ours if we just think about it, prepare for it, and apply our strengths to it. So
Mm-hmm.
that'll be my second book coming out this fall.
So what was the hardest part about writing your first book?
Um, you know, the writing itself was probably the easiest part. I mean, especially for the first book, I was writing about my life. And so, yeah, there's times where you have to kind of think about things and talk to family members to get different perspectives, but writing it itself was the relatively easy part. After you get it kind of all on paper, your first draft, and it's pretty ugly, you don't worry about grammar, you just throw a lot of stuff down. Then you get into the more challenging part of editing. So taking this lump of paper and trying to make it into a story. So cutting out a lot of pieces, adding to it, changing things, moving things around from the front to the back and whatnot. And so the editing is really where it comes into focus. But that was, it's fun to write it. And so you're writing a book. It's not as glamorous to be editing it, but
Mm-hmm.
but good books are edited well and bad books are not edited at all. And those tend to be confusing. So I spent a lot of time editing the book. And then after that, decided to self-publish the book, and that was a whole new area of learning for me because I've never done any of that either. But I enjoyed it. It was like a project to manage, and learned a lot about the publishing world in the process.
So I kind of want to divulge back into what your book is specifically about, which is being introverted and stuff like that. And I know
Mhm.
high school can be very, very tough with students that are extroverts and introverts.
Mhm.
And do you have any idea or any like tips on how to deal with those environments if you're an introvert?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I can recall my own teenage years, and I can also recall, when I was in my 20s and 30s, and it doesn't necessarily get that much easier unless you take some really important steps. So, when I looked back, I realized there were kind of five phases to introversion. And the first one is just what I call unaware, we don't know about introversion. We might feel that we're different because we're not comfortable in certain settings or people are nudging us to do things we don't like, but we just don't know about it. And so we're unaware. And many of us, including myself, go through that well through teenage years. And then we learn about it. We hear about introversion. It sounds familiar. We connect with it, but we're in this second phase of being uninformed. So as I mentioned earlier, when people first say, "Oh, introversion," a lot of people say, "Oh, you're shy," which is a completely different thing. But they say, "Oh, you're," so I connect with introversion, but I don't really understand what that means, and I connect it more with the negative stigmatisms of introversion. And so that unaware phase can also oftentimes be difficult because you feel like those negative words must be true, and that's hard to get out from under. Eventually, a lot of people, most introverts, will kind of learn more about it. So some people have read books like Susan Cain wrote the book Quiet, which is kind of the Bible for introverts in some ways. And it really exposed about 10, 15 years ago what the truths were about introversion and dispelled a lot of these myths and shared a lot of the strengths that introverts have and the importance of having introverts in the classroom, in the workplace, all that sort of stuff. And so a lot of people in the third phase, which I call enlightenment, kind of learn about it. And they learn that these horrible words in the dictionary are not true and that we actually have a lot to bring to the table. And that's an exciting phase, but a lot of people don't go through that phase. I've taken some polls on my website, and some people are in their 40s and 50s before they kind of learn enough to start to feel comfortable with who they are. So part of my mission, if you will, is trying to connect with younger people to help them through the process so that they're not waiting until then. So to answer your question about what can you do now, I think a lot of it is don't listen to other people, learn about it yourself. There's a ton of books out there now, a lot of things on the web that you can look at, or you talk to other people. Introverts tend to kind of lay low. So it's not like they have a flag they're waving around that you can go talk to them. But there's lots of introverts probably in your family and in your school. There's probably a lot of introverts. And so a way to just talk to them and kind of figure out what's going on. Introverts the definition of introverts, there's lots of definitions, but the best definition I have is really just how we gain energy. So extroverts, after a long week of school or work, extroverts want to go out and go to parties and socialize, and that just builds their energy. They love to do that. Not all the time, but that's kind of where they thrive. Introverts, on the other hand, generally they need a little quiet time. Now, that doesn't mean we don't go to parties or socialize, but it means that generally when we're building energy or recuperating from a week, we want to do something that's quieter, either by ourselves or with an intimate group of friends or family. And it just gives us some time to relax, exhale, and collect ourselves. And then we can kind of go off and jump back into a social situation or something like that. So I really think that's important for introverts to be aware of and think about. I do need to create some time for myself to re-energize. And if I know I've got some things going on during the day that are going to be stressful, whether it's a presentation or a social event or a debate or something that is not really something I have a passion for, I just need to plan ahead and I need to relax. I need to prepare for that. I need to kind of build in some time to rebuild my energy before those events. The other thing I would say, especially for people in high school, is, despite the fact you might look around and see all these loud, gregarious people and think that's the norm, that's half the population. The other half of the population are just like you. There's introverts everywhere. And so you should take some comfort that you're not alone, that there are other people that are working those same challenges. I always think it's helpful to kind of find those people. But I think the concern of feeling alone or different is something that can be dispelled only through learning and experience.
Yeah, those are some really good words. Like that, those definitely reached to me.
Well, when I wrote the book, and now I do a weekly blog on my website of different topics for introverts, from teenage tips to retirement and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
And I really have found I get a lot of feedback from introverts that connect with it, and I've learned more and more that there's a lot of people going through the same challenges, and life throws us all curveballs, but in this case, we can control this curveball by learning about it and taking solace that we're not alone, and that all of our dreams and wishes they're all doable. They can all come true. You don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. Maybe that's their personality, just like this is your personality. But a lot of introverts tend to have a lot of great skills. Nobody's all alike, and no introverts are all alike. But many introverts are very creative, whether that's writing or art or just thinking creatively about problem solving and that sort of stuff. Introverts tend to be very caring and empathetic. Again, not that extroverts are not, but most introverts tend to be on that end of the spectrum. And though they don't build a lot of close friendships, the ones that we have tend to be deeper friendships because we don't really enjoy the chit chat. We would rather sit down and talk about some things of substance. Doesn't have to be deep introspective things, but could be politics or anything else that are of more substance. And from that, we build better relationships. And so I think it's not about hiding behind our introversion, but it's actually learning about it and using it and leveraging it to find the people that we want in our lives and to do the things that we want in high school and when you get off to college and think about careers.
So kind of like thinking into careers, right? So what do you think your purpose is in life? Like, what do you think you were put on this earth to do?
That's a great question. And I think that's changed for me. I kind of led off by saying I was a bit of a late bloomer. And so, I'm 55 now, and I think my purpose in the last few years has definitely changed after I finished kind of life in the corporate world, and I have really enjoyed what I'm doing now. So my purpose now, my answer to your question now is that I have the opportunity to be an advocate for introverts, and whether that's in the workplace or otherwise. And so that's my purpose. And I'm fortunate enough to have the platform and to be able to kind of work through my podcast, my blog, this podcast, and other ways and platforms that are offered to me to help some other introverts to recognize that there's great opportunities ahead and to really make sure you're doing things your own way. So, and I think no matter what anybody's purpose is, if you know your purpose and you have a passion for it, then time flies by and we enjoy life a lot better than if we're doing something that either our parents told us we should do. I went through that 30 years ago when I was kind of nudged into the business world instead of doing journalism as I had wished, or we're doing something just purely for the money. If you can do something that you really have a purpose and a passion for, then life's going to be a lot more pleasant, I think.
I think that's a really good note to end this on, Steve.
Sure.
So I'd really like to thank you for coming out here, coming to talk on the show and being on the podcast. I think it spoke to a lot of people because I know a lot of people that watch this that are also introverted. And I think it might help them. And right here on the screen is his book you can buy. You can check it out. I think he'd really appreciate it, and we'd appreciate it too.
Yeah, sure.
And then now right on the screen here are our socials. Follow us on Twitter at Noble Knights FHN and Instagram at Noble Knights FHN. And once again, I'd like to thank you, Steve, for coming out today and spreading your message and telling everything about yourself and maybe giving people an idea of what they want to do with their life. A like and a comment's always appreciated, Steve, how you felt about the episode. And if you have any questions for Steve, you can send them to me or you can put them in the comments and I'll ask him to see if he has an answer. Now, I've been Ian Pierce. This has been Steve Friedman, and we'll see you next time on the Noble Knights podcast. See you guys.